Dr. Glenn Kreider is professor of Theological Studies here at DTS. Dr. Kreider's lived almost exactly half of his life in Dallas County and has been connected to Dallas Theological Seminary in some fashion during all those years, as a student, as an adjunct, and then as a full-time faculty member. He has enjoyed nearly 40 years of marriage to his best friend, Janice. They have 2 children, a daughter and a son, and 1 granddaughter. Dr. Kreider believes that grace really is amazing. It is a thought that will change the world. He and Janice enjoy live music, good stories, bold coffee, and their 4 rescue dogs, 2 pugs, a Chihuahua, and a black lab. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kreider to chapel today.
Morning. Morning. Blaine Larson, he says, is a recovering country music artist. I hope he never completes recovery. He has recorded 3 studio albums and 8 top 40 singles as a major label recording artist. He's also a songwriter and has written for numerous other artists, including co-writing a top 5, I think it was 2, single for Texas-owned George Strait. He transitioned from the music industry to ministry in 2012. He now serves in Nashville with Search Ministries, an organization focused on having conversations about the essential questions of life and God. The Search's goal is to help people take their next step toward a relationship with Christ. And if you're interested, you can find out more about Search and Blaine at searchministries.org. And Blaine is also a current student here at DTS in Nashville. The song he's going to sing today is called Saint Somewhere.
Well, I saw an old man sitting at the bar, and the age in his eyes said he traveled far. And I said, "Hey, mister, what brought you here?" He turned and smiled, sipped his beer. Said, "If you've got a while, son, well, I'll tell you a tale of a life I left behind for a 20-foot sail, and how the wind carried me there to Saint Somewhere." Well, I was making me a killing selling stocks and bonds, but that cold city living felt all wrong. There was a girl back then, but she's long gone now, so I painted her name across the bow. She could not understand this aching in my heart, or why I'd throw it all away just to drift among the stars. I guess we weren't meant to share Saint Somewhere. And where I drop my anchor is the place that I call home, and it's my refuge from life's storm. My backyard is an island, and everywhere I go, I like to have my neighbors come aboard. So come aboard. Well, I almost lost her in a hurricane, and And I know too well the captain was to blame. 'Cause when you turn your back on the raging sea, well, there's a real good chance she'll sink your dreams. And the only thing is certain as the rising of the tide is the last breath I'm gonna take on the day I die. Will be fresh ocean air near Saint somewhere. And I hope to see you there in Saint somewhere.
Saints. The Saint Somewhere tells a story. It's a story about a guy like you and a guy like me, who longs for an escape from the pressures of life. It's about a man and a boat and a dream, but it's much more than that. It's a parable of life, of hopes, desires, and the harsh reality that life doesn't always turn out the way we might hope. It was written by Blaine, by Mark Beeson, and Tim Johnson. Richard Carney, in his book on stories, says telling stories is as basic to human beings as eating. More so, in fact, for while food makes us live, stories are what make our lives worth living. Eugene Peterson has written in Eat This Book, story is the primary verbal means of bringing God's word to us. The story doesn't just tell us something and leave it there, it invites our participation. A good storyteller gathers us into the story. We feel the emotions, get caught up in the drama, identify with the characters, see into the nooks and crannies of life that we have overlooked, and realize there is more to this business of being human than we had yet explored. In short, storytelling is a way we make sense of the world around us. We can't help but tell stories. Now, Matthew chapter 1 might not sound like a story. It is, after all, a genealogy. But it's not merely part of the context for what follows. It is a story of stories. It records a list of names. But to those who are informed by the biblical story, these are more than just names. They're characters in a great story. In Matthew's account, they are the family tree of the Messiah. Several of the names occur only in genealogies, Perez and Zerah. They are what we might call minor characters, not because they are unimportant, because none of them is unimportant. In fact, remove any of the names from the genealogy, there's no Jesus. By minor characters, we mean that they receive little attention in this and the broader narrative. But some of these names are major characters. They receive a great deal of attention in the biblical story. Names like Abraham, David, and Solomon, and Mary. Every name on the list reminds the reader of a story. In fact, it reminds the reader of multiple stories. Different stories create different characters, or at least different characterizations of those characters. That was important to Matthew, that several of these names remind us of specific stories. Some of the names, he merely mentions the names. Other times, he gives us details like Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Of all the stories we know about Judah, he, by the way, was the brother who had proposed selling Joseph to the Ishmaelite merchants instead of killing him. The one story Matthew asks us to recall is the story in Genesis 38, the story of his relationship with his daughter-in-law, the Canaanite. Of the many stories we could tell about David, Matthew focuses on one. David, he says, was the father of Solomon, whose mother had been Uriah's wife. Of all the stories we could be reminded, he reminds us of that one. These stories are true. They are the tales of real people who lived in real places in real time and did real things, sometimes really bad things. And their stories are included in the genealogy of Jesus. The Bible is a story. It's a story made up of many stories, and the stories are true. Jesus, too, was a storyteller. Sometimes he retold stories from the Bible, and other times he told stories that he made up. And sometimes in telling stories from the Bible, all he did was mention a name. So he compares himself to Jonah. And everybody who knows the story recognizes the point of comparison to Jonah. But he uses the Jonah story two different ways in Matthew and in Luke. He references Abraham, his father, Elijah, and the prophets, real stories about real people. But he also told parables, stories that never happened. They're rooted in reality. They're not like Star Wars, a story that could never happen because it involves creatures that could never exist. His parables, too, were real stories. For example, he told a story about a man who had two sons. He told a story about a vineyard owner who hired workers at different times throughout the day. And he told a story about two men who died and went to the afterlife, a story which some people think is a parable and others believe actually happened. Both the stories rooted in history and the stories he made up are true, but they are not all true in the same way. Yes, the parables were true stories, even though the characters existed only within the world that the storyteller created. And the story of Jesus' life and ministry, his birth, life, death, resurrection, and hope of his return, these stories too are true, but they are rooted in the real world, in the world that God created. Saint Somewhere is not a real place, except as a metaphor for a place of redemption that exists, not simply in the mind of the lyricists, but in each one of us. That song is a parable. Lyricists often do that. They tell stories in a song, a story rooted in reality, but not necessarily a story that actually happened. Lyricists also tell other kinds of stories. Sometimes they tell their own stories, sometimes using the first person, but sometimes not. But not every song written in the first person is autobiographical. Sometimes the first person is used to tell the story from the perspective of the main character. And lyricists sometimes take some liberty with the facts of history, not to be dishonest or deceptive, but to contextualize the story in a slightly different way, kind of like Jesus did with the story of Jonah. Here's an example of a song whose lyrics are rooted in history. Blaine and I wrote this song, and I'm grateful to him for the opportunity not simply to have worked with him in writing it, but to sit here while he sings it. The first stanza is the story of Blaine's grandmother, who was a teenager living in Nuremberg, Germany in 1945, when she met an American GI and fell in love. Her father was a Nazi soldier. He wasn't sympathetic to their cause. He was forced into the military and was taken prisoner by the Americans. And needless to say, her German parents were not really happy. They were appalled that their daughter would marry an American. No 18-year-old girl in Nuremberg, no Blaine Larson. The second stanza is based upon the parents of Jesus of Nazareth, the biblical story of Mary and Joseph. Most scholars believe that she was a young girl, probably between 12 and 14 years old, when the angel announced to her the amazingly good news that she would be the mother of the Messiah. And most scholars also believe that Joseph was older. Last time Joseph is mentioned in the New Testament is in Luke 2, when Jesus is 12 years old. Many scholars conclude that Joseph died somewhere around the time Jesus began his ministry or before, which explains, among other things, why Jesus charged John with taking care of his mother at the cross. So the two of us, we began to think about this story. What if Mary was a 13-year-old girl? What might be going through her mind when she hears this amazing message from the angel? What if Joseph was an older man? Maybe he already had been married. Maybe he's now a widower. Maybe he's already raised some children. We're not claiming that these details of the story of the song are true. The Bible is silent about many of the particulars of the story of Jesus, but songwriters don't have to be, and neither do preachers. What is true of all of our stories is that they are orchestrated by the sovereign hand of God, which is good news for a guy like me. The child born to the 18-year-old German woman is the mother of my friend. The child born to the young girl from Nazareth in Galilee is the Savior of the world. And that's good news for guys like Blaine and me. That's good news for you and me. Here's a guy like me.
She was 18, just trying to survive. Nuremberg, Germany in 45. He was an American looking for a smoke, and she had a few just burning a hole. You see, cigarettes were money back during the war, and their one-time thing became a little more. Her mama didn't care that much for him, and daddy was fighting the Americans. And that's good news for a guy like me, who wouldn't be here if not for my history. What goes around don't come around. Oh, I never thought it could be. But that's good news for a guy like me. She was 13 when she got the word. Didn't know much about the bees and the birds. And she was much too young to be that late, and next year's school was gonna have to wait. And he had just buried the love of his life, and he wasn't really looking for another wife. But her child needs a father to care for him, and he never thought he'd do that again. And that's good news for a guy like me, who wouldn't be here if not for my history. What goes around don't come around. Oh, I never thought it could be. But that's good news for a guy like me. And stories bring us to our time and place. Look back, you'll see some good and all grace. And that's good news for you and me. No, we wouldn't be here if not for our history. What goes around don't come around. Oh, we never thought it could be. But that's good news for you and me. Yeah, what goes around don't come around. Oh, we never thought it could be. But that's good news for you and me. Yeah, that's good news for you and me.
The good news of the gospel is that what goes around don't come around.
Amen.
And that's some good news for you and me. Thank you.